Greetings, I'm Steve Evans with a warm welcome to Business Daily, in which today the cost of confronting corruption and that moment you dread at work.
When somebody walks up to you and puts their arm around you and says, "Let me offer you a little feedback," what's the feeling you get? It's generally, "Oh no, here it comes."
All in Business Daily from the BBC with Steve Evans. If you think that the managers who manage you are logical, think again. If you think you are logical in your response to them, think again. The latest brain research using scans of the magnetic impulses of the brain indicate it's much more complicated than that. Charles Jacobs of the Amherst Consulting Group in the US has documented the research in his book, Management Rewired.
Not only do we make our decisions based on our emotional orientation, when we try to convince people using just logic, we're bound to fail. So we need to bring emotion into it. That's really what tends to sway people. And by the way, there are times when we want to make emotions logically, but generally in business, if it involves anything to do with people, we want that emotional orientation. Most cognitive scientists now believe that the mind works through stories. Stories are immediately accessible to us, and stories really are a mix of both logic and emotion. We think a story and we feel a story. So if we want to convince people to support us or to take an action, we're going to be much better suited if we can tell them a story that that action fits into.
Take feedback at work, managers giving you feedback at work. We're all taught to think that we want it. It's a good thing, but that's not so, is it?
No, it really isn't. And the key on feedback is this. When somebody walks up to you and puts their arm around you and says, "Let me offer you a little feedback," what's the feeling you get? But generally it's not, "Oh great, I have an opportunity to grow and develop." It's generally, "Oh no, here it comes." So we tend to get tense and we tend to resist the feedback. And we have this self-image that we've created over our lifetimes. And the self-image hopefully is positive. When we encounter feedback that conflicts with that self-image, we will do everything we can to reduce that dissonance. And the easiest way to do it is not to change the self-image we've built up over a lifetime, but to either reject the feedback or rationalize it or ignore it. And in fact, if the feedback is perceived as particularly punitive, it becomes in our best psychological interest to reject the source of the feedback and actually punish in return. So if I'm your manager, and with all good intentions in my version of reality, I give you feedback to help you improve, but you read that feedback as punitive, it becomes in your best interest to punish me. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to persist in the behavior that you'd like changed. So feedback can actually make behavior worse rather than improve it. So the best thing for a manager to do is not tell people how they're doing, but ask them. Use a series of questions to help people give feedback to themselves. Then their self-image is caught up in following through on correcting any behavior that may be problematical.
Isn't this just saying that managers should be sensitive? I know you said sensible, but sensitive. Use their brains a bit.
Well, that is what the research tells us. It's odd, but all of the things your mother taught you about being polite and thinking about people's feelings really come into the fore. But managers tend to get caught up in driving against a set of objectives, and their orientation and their rewards are based on driving to those objectives. So it's as if their minds are on a different channel than they need to be. And I think if there's one thing I'd recommend to managers, it's to really try to empathize with people and imagine if you were in their shoes, how you would respond to what you're about to say.
Except that, it's empathy and all that kind of thing. Of course, sometimes. But aren't there times when managers just have to kick bottom?
Well, the problem with kicking bottom, or we call it giving tough messages, the problem with that is that you create this dynamic where it's not in people's interest to change that behavior, because then they prove you right, and that's the last thing they want to do. But I think that there's another issue here. Most managers are actually afraid to fire people, to help them pursue career opportunities elsewhere, because they're not sure that they've necessarily been fair. They're not sure that their read of a situation is accurate. So what tends to happen is that bad performance is tolerated much longer than it should be. I believe absolutely that people should be terminated when they're not performing, and that people should feel the same pressure in their jobs that companies feel in the marketplace. If a manager has used questions to help employees come up with objectives that work both for them and for the business, if they've used questions to help the employee give feedback to themselves, and the employee still doesn't perform at the level that is necessary for the business to be successful, they ought to go find a job elsewhere. And then it's not emotional. It's simply a business decision. So I think this approach, being a little bit more sensitive, using questions, actually enables managers to operate more effectively and produce better results.
Charles Jacobs luring you into sending emails to world.business@bbc.co.uk. And also, don't forget our website, www.bbcworldservice.com, where you can download the Business Daily podcast.